So my name is Allison Backus-Troy, and I'm so excited to be able to host this interview with my friend Summer Kinard on her new and wonderful book of Such is the Kingdom, A Practical Theology of Disability. Summer is just a wonderful person, and I'm so glad to be her friend, and I'm so honored that Phoebe is having us share this video on her blog, because I think that Summer's book is really life-changing for this time in the church and for people across a wide variety of Christian spectrums, and I'm just really honored to be able to just sit with my friend and talk about this beautiful book. So we're just going to hang out and answer some questions, and hopefully we'll give you a really rich taste of what is here in this book that Summer has been, taking care of and nurturing and putting together for a really long time. So the first question I have for you, unless do you want to add anything else? You're good? Okay.
I just want to say hi.
In her beautiful recording studio. I love this.
Thank you.
I love this so much. So I wanted to open our time with this quote from your book. And the reason I wanted to open it is that when I was reading the book, this really stood out to me as an example of the driving purpose of this book, and I wanted to share it and kind of, now that the book is out in the world, see kind of your thoughts on it. But what this quote is a description of right after your youngest son Basil had been given some some diagnoses, and I'm just going to read the quote here. When I began the process of writing this book 3 years ago, I was facing the prospect of teaching my fully nonverbal youngest son about the life of faith. I remember standing at the icon corner after we received the results of his earliest evaluations, the ones that showed him at the bottom of the scale of communication ability, among other challenges, and looking from my dear son to the cross on the wall. Here was a child given to me by God, a miracle child whose severe birth defect had saved his life from an even worse birth defect, and a group of experts handed me a page with a few pictures on it and the advice, maybe he'll be able to associate these pictures with things that he wants. But the images of what I wanted for him were right in front of me on the icon wall. I wanted my boy to know God. That's just such a powerful quote, because I think that regardless of what our families look like, that's what we want for our children, what we want for ourselves. How does this quote strike you now, hearing it and hearing you read it?
Well, so I'm supposed to be recording the audiobook for this, and I've cried at every single time I've tried to say this, and I haven't gotten through chapter 1, the introduction. So I'm working on getting through it.
It's so close to you.
It's so close. That was such a powerful moment for me. I've studied for so many years the Logos, Christ, the Logos of God, the Word of God, and to have children and for me, a child who couldn't communicate, and to have people also say to me sometimes, well-meaning, but a little nonsensically, that, everything is about reason a certain way, and it's about understanding, and I was like, yes, but not the way you mean it, and it was hard for me to put into words, and I was like, there's something here, there's more to the image of God than being able to recite poetry. There's more there, and wanting him to know God. I went on in that passage. I think that's where I was talking about the miracle that happened after that, where my son, I went and I tell people, I said in the book probably that I prayed. I don't remember how I put it, but I don't think that God's somewhere else. So let me just make that blunt. I don't send my prayers somewhere.
Yeah.
My prayers may arise like incense, but it can be making God sneeze because he's right here. Yeah. Okay? Yeah. It's right here. So for me, it was, I went to the icons and I looked at Jesus and the Theotokos, and I said, looked at Jesus and I was like, you make him do this. You give him this.
Yeah.
And it was not some piously worded poetic request. It was really the boldness of a mother, and it was just right out of my heart, right out of love. And I don't think that God doesn't want us to have that. I I have the myrrh-bearing women here, people who went anyway, you know what I mean?
Yes, yeah.
So I went and I said, you put this word in his heart, you put your love there, and teach him how to talk, how to read. I think I said reading. And it was amazing because even though that was a little bit of a ridiculous request in some ways. He's 2 years old. I didn't know what communication was exactly. I hadn't read all this stuff about how to help people communicate. But even though my request was like out there and over the top, the next day my son wrote Odagetria on the board in magnets. And we were like, did this really happen? Like, are we just doing that thing where moms are like, oh, or dads are like, oh, he said gaga, that means he's grandma, right, or whatever.
Right, but here's this like very complex.
Odagetria, and like it's the English spelling, but it was the Greek word, of course, for she who shows the way, or the directress, that icon.
Oh, that's so like...
yeah, it was the icon of the Theotokos that I had sort of bossed around. So
like
it was,
showing up for you in such a
she was there. She was
way.
like, okay,
here
I'm on it.
Yeah.
And so here, and then we thought, well, let's just wait and see. Let's take a picture. And I can't find the picture now.
Yeah.
Like, of course, it got lost, or it might be somewhere. But then 2 days later, he wrote on the board, go downstairs. He actually spelled out those words, because that's how he told us he wanted to go outside and play, because it was downstairs at our old house, the backyard. And we were like, wow. And it was in those moments of suddenly realizing that God was with us in his disability.
Yeah.
It wasn't just that he was with us, and I already believed he was with us. He was with us in the disability.
Yes.
That my son's disability was going to somehow reveal the presence and the glory of God. And
with you. Yeah.
Yeah, it was just, so that's what it was. It was just meaningful.
Yeah.
And it still is. And I'm like, don't cry.
Oh no, tears are good. I have like chills right now. It's such a wonderful, oh my gosh.
It was an amazing
That's
moment.
like a holy visitation.
It was really
It really
amazing.
is. Yeah. Yeah.
And when I say, I didn't put it in there, the details, I should have gone and gotten this paper. It's downstairs in my office. I saved it because it was so ridiculous. It was like 2 pictures of a spoon, and I had told them that he liked it when we sang songs, so they put like Twinkle Little Star on it, and like the cow jumped over the moon.
Like his, like the therapist.
The picture was just a picture of a cow jumping over a moon and some stars and a couple of spoons. And I want to say maybe like one other song. I can't remember the other. Maybe like a Bad Black Sheep, something like that. It was like nothing. And these were what he was going to do. And I was like...
Well, he clearly...
They didn't tell... They were like, here you go. And I'm like... What do I do with this? And
it's so patronizing.
They were doing the best they could. They were, but it was just. But this is one of the things. A lot of families don't have access to good therapy. Thanks be to God. And also, I had the state person that I was working with. She told me, we're not allowed to recommend therapists because it's against the rules. But she said, what I'll tell you is who I've worked with and who I haven't worked with. Wink, wink. And so thankfully she said, here's this person, and I've worked with her. And here's this other person who also has these qualifications. I've never worked with him before, or whatever, something like that. Well, anyway, one of the 2 or 3 people she'd worked with, I said, well, let's go with her because she seems to have this background in people with communication challenges, like lots of them. And some speech therapists focus on being able to articulate, which he needed that too, but we wanted everything.
Right.
His therapist came in, and we tried to get him to communicate, and we tried these games, and like I was already, and like this isn't bragging, this is just a truth. I was already really good at the occupational therapy stuff without knowing it. And we tried to do his sensory things. We had an OT, we had all sorts of stuff, and he just didn't understand anything. It just wasn't sticking. We got him to play a game one time, and then he immediately couldn't do it, and nothing was working. So she said, I have a hunch. And I was like, tell me what it is. I knew. When she said that, I was like, yes. And she was like, because she said most parents are really reluctant to do more work.
And you're like, I want the work.
I was like, tell me what I can do.
Yeah.
Tell me something to generalize. And she brought me this language system called a POD, which is Pragmatic Organized Dynamic Display. It's everything in speech therapy and autism is like an acronym.
Yeah.
And so some of them I'm going to mess up if I try to explain, but that's what that one is. It's an entire language system in pictures. And it was a flip book, and you had to model it and teach. And I was like, let's try it. She brought a little miniature one with just a few pages, and she was like, let's just see how he does. And that first day, he learned the word go. We pointed at go, and then he went down the slide. Can you go down the slide? And he did. And we had this car that we would push him in. and we did go, and he did go, and he started pushing his button on his car to say go, and he would point at it, and so all of a sudden he understood that there was a thing called language, and it was with go. He had no language before that, and I was like, yes.
And go is his word. I love that. Go is his word. I love it.
He's like, he had go, and then it took him a little time, and then eventually he had, I like this, I don't like this. I was insistent that as a 2-year-old he had to have emotional thing, and most people, like, that's, I talked to Bobby Maddox recently, and I told him, I can't, no one is allowed anymore, no one says that they're stupid, but I honestly, if you want to know something about me, I honestly just think that I just don't know anything, and that I am kind of dumb, and I've always, my whole life, thought of myself as a little dim, and now, you know, if you look at evidence, it would say that I'm actually not, that I make straight A's and things like that. but this is what that's the outcome. But my experience is I have no idea.
Right.
My experience is I go to God and I say, I don't know what I'm doing. Tell me what to do, or teach me. And then I suddenly understand it, and then I know. So with him, it was the same thing. I was like, God, what do I do? And it was like, and he taught me, and I said, oh, let's teach him this way. And so my son, by having an emotional language, his meltdowns went almost entirely away.
Wow.
Because we started with that. And then we started with, I like this, I don't like this, this hurts, or I'm upset, or whatever. And he immediately would calm down because somebody understood him.
Right.
And all these things just built up. And anyway, it was this amazing moment. But then immediately I started to realize I needed to use this communication ability for the faith. And that was sort of the beginning of my path of making a bridge between people who couldn't communicate easily and the Word of God.
Yeah.
And that sounds weird because it's like, of course, He's the bridge, but you prepare the way of the Lord.
Yes.
You know, you prepare.
And this is a way of preparing.
Yeah, you make straight in the desert a highway for our God.
Yeah.
And this is a desert, and it's hard.
Yeah. Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about, so you're saying, like, and if this is correct me if this is like a wrong paraphrase, but this life of living within a family that, you know, has various autism diagnoses, various visible and invisible disabilities, the way is hard. It's like a desert. Can you talk a little bit about I'm sorry, this is such a broad question, but I feel like not enough people really understand what family life is like for people who deal with disabilities.
Yeah. And it's in part because most of us don't talk about it, or if we do, people wouldn't believe us.
Yeah.
There's one thing I don't like. You'll get these people who come online who are attention seekers, like the moms who put on like a 90-minute makeup job, and they're like in their car, like, let me tell you about my day. And they've got their brand new nails, and they're blinged out, and you're like, really, your life is, it's hard to believe that sort of thing. And then they pose like this. I'm so sad because my son's autistic, and I'm like, those people I cannot stand because they're lying. That's why. Not for any other reason, because they're trying to get attention. Yeah. I'm like, if you want attention, go get attention. But don't pretend that that's the point of this. The tragedy in my life is that I'm a sinner, and that I'm really bad at stopping that. I keep on messing up, and I can't overcome my own sins or even see them most of the time. But the tragedy of my life is not that I'm autistic or that my son's autistic. I struggle, and my struggles are in that context of an autistic family. But, if everyone's loud and I'm overwhelmed, yes, I have to give myself grace and say, maybe, you go through, did you just cuss because you have a bad habit? Did you cuss because it was echolalia, where you accidentally repeated a word that was nonsense, and you could maybe switch it out for a different nonsense word, like, what was it, Fraggle Rock? Can you say Fraggle Rock instead, Summer? Something like that. Or did you cuss because you're mad and you need to get that passion in check? There's all these things, and you need a spiritual father for that too. Or was it grief? Was this PTSD? What is the reason? Why are you acting like this, right? So I may have to, in my own life, with my own struggles with sin and passions, I need to discern, because I have to ask the autism question too. Yeah. But I never have to ask the question, am I sinning more because of my kid's autism? No. The answer is no. That's, if there's a sin, it's my struggle for whatever reason. And sometimes it's something that is really beyond my own will. Mm-hmm. Like we confess, those of my own will and those not of my own. Right. Sometimes I don't mean to, and I sometimes can't help it. Like if I yell, sometimes I'm like, I'm not trying to yell. I can't regulate my voice right now. Give me a second. And like, if someone requires a response and I've hit a wall in my autism of apraxia, I cannot control my voice sometimes. Sometimes it won't come out. And sometimes I yell and I'm like, so our family can be really funny sometimes. They'll have people, I'm not mad. I'm just yelling because I can't understand what's happening.
Yes.
Me too. We're not mad at each other. Okay. And it's like, why are we, let's all stop.
Right.
We can have that kind of moment. But the thing that people, so that's like the humorous, like inside take on what are my problems kind of thing. But in general, we don't have any time. Any free time. We don't have any money. We're always broke. And this is not just us. We don't have a bad income, and we're not unfrugal, and we're not irresponsible financially. But we have therapy. We have therapeutic things we have to put in the home.
Yes.
We have special foods we have to buy.
Yes,
and
which are expensive.
They're expensive. We have food allergies. And this is the other thing. Autistic kids, so some people say, well, you're just spoiling them, or you're picky, and it's none of that mess. So drop that. Whatever you read on somebody's nasty Facebook post is a lie. This is a thing. Like, okay, I'll give you an example when I was a kid, so I don't call my kids out. When I was a kid, this is what food was. Round. I loved round things. I would eat it if it was round. Now, that sounds really crazy, but it's true. So I loved potato chips because they were sort of round. I would eat a sandwich because I would take the sandwich and I would bite it into a circle. And then I would eat it. But I would like nibble it until I was like, I can't even. And I did that out of survival because I was hungry and it wasn't round. And then I loved to drink milk because it was in a round cup.
Yes.
And this may sound completely wacko. And this, I obviously don't do this now. Although you did see me drinking a cup of tea. So. And I did serve you scones. So
you did, and they were awesome.
That was round too. But no, I now no longer eat only foods that were round. But when I was a kid, I had a really hard time with foods that were different shapes. And even though that sounds weird, my brain wouldn't process it as food. So my parents, looking back, I'm like, I can't believe they figured out how to feed me. Like it was the 80s. I wasn't diagnosed. They just thought I was this really picky kid and they were worried about me and they were like, how can I feed her? And so I would get Ritz crackers.
Yeah.
And they would give me, I mean, we also had bowls of ramen because we were poor. So it was like bowls of ramen or like SOS, which is like a meat and gravy thing on toast. Mm-hmm. And beans and rice, things like that. But beans were okay because even though they weren't exactly round, they could be if you cross-sectioned them. So I take beans and eat them one at a time and look at them, make sure they were round. It's totally
the circle.
It's the circle. Yeah. I don't know what was up with my brain. That's just how I was. And I was like this little malnourished little kid until I was about 8 or 9. And suddenly I would accept other foods. And then I was fat. So, hi. I don't know. Just my body was like, oh my gosh, you never eat. So I had a famine metabolism at that point. So I was like, oh well. But yeah, so for me, that kind of a challenge, take it seriously if someone says, no, my kid will only eat these 5 foods. It's not, oh, we're some sort of stupid people who never thought of introducing broccoli 75 times in a row. Or, oh, gee, I'm lazy and I don't like to cook. Now I'm an excellent cook. I'm really good at cooking and baking. My kids will not recognize it as food, and they will die. They will literally die. My son, who drinks a bottle at the age of 5.5, cannot drink any other way. And I've tried, and I've tried, and I've tried. And he dehydrates, and then he will die. This is a life or death thing. And I think people don't understand that our stakes are always high. They're through the roof high. If you miss something, we're always worried, like, we say, God, grant me many years so I can take care of my kids. I'm like, I'm not afraid of death. I need to take care of my kids. Right. You know, I need to take care of them. Who's going to teach them or give them their abilities? And so it's food. It's safety is a major big deal.
Yeah.
I can't go a lot of places with my kids because if my son runs away, he'll die. He won't come back. He doesn't know how. And when he goes silent when he's scared, and I have a daughter who does that too, they just shut down and they can't talk. So I'm all like, there's like, for me, it's not a matter of, oh, you know, and I have one medically fragile child. So if I say to you, oh, are the kids at this homeschool co-op vaccinated? And you say no, I'm like, I'm sorry, we can't participate. I'm not being an anti-vax or pro-vax fighter. I'm saying if my kid gets this disease, he'll die. The stakes are really high for us.
And like
it's
all the time.
All the time.
Every day.
Everything.
Every hour
Food,
of the day.
Safety. Where are we? Where can we go? what kind of if we do go to church every Sunday, which a lot of people think is impressive, and we're just like, but we just do it. I mean, we skip maybe once every few months, or if there's an illness, which sometimes you can't help it if you're ill, right? But and when I say skip, I mean like once every few months there's something that comes up where we have to. Not like we're skipping like
stay home today.
Smell you later. Right? Whatever. We're not like, oh no, I can't come to Vespers because I am hanging out with myself in the bath. Whatever. Yeah, no.
Getting my winged eyeliner on to look good.
My wings are awesome and my toes are done. No, it's not like that. But yeah, so I mean the stakes are so high. And then when you do get to church, for me this is a thing. Some people think autistic people don't notice social things, but usually it's the opposite. They usually notice them more, and it depends on the person. For me, I grew up in a very traumatized. I have complex PTSD because I grew up in a very traumatic home environment where reading people's body language was necessary for survival. So I would have gotten killed a lot of times. So for me, I recognize it right away. But what I do, since I'm autistic, is I have this, and it's not just that. Maybe I'm just more mature. I don't know. I choose to act on what I decide to act on. Because at all times, I have the habit of always having to choose what I think. Because I have an overly complex brain. So if someone says to me, Summer, some simple question, my brain will say, here are the 27 or 28 things that they could mean by that.
Right.
Probability-wise, which one are they asking? And now I'm 42, and I've lived in the world, and I could usually guess pretty accurately one of the two things that they're most likely going to wanting to know. I don't always get it right, as you probably know, because I answered a weird question on accident. But whenever it comes to things like that, if I go to a church and people are like, oh, that kid is doing something in church. I'm looking at you in the liturgy because you're weird. I'm just look back at them and I'm like,
yeah.
And I'm just like, I'm going to choose to respond to you like somebody who needs the mercy and love of God as much as I do. Because that's the thing. We always have our choices. And if you don't have a choice, well then I need to do even better with mine so that I can on your behalf help you. And
also help yourself and protect like the people who are around you.
Right. And there's been a few times I've come across a few hostile people in churches, and I tell them like, my kids are autistic.
Yeah.
Please, don't do that or whatever, or they can't help it. And most people are understanding. There's been a few people who are kind of mean, but whenever that happens, in order to not judge people, I just go, this isn't theological right now. Sorry. I played the Taylor Swift song from 2000, whatever, back before when she had good music. That sounds mean. Sorry, before she became kind of mean herself. She had that song Mean.
Yes.
Yeah. Now she's a little mean. So I'm
she's been through some stuff. So it's
I'm not trying to judge, but I don't like her music so much.
There's an edge now.
She kind of doesn't like Christians anymore and things, but yeah, I'm not trying to promote her, but that old song Mean is really, I'm like, that's my catharsis. And I'm like, why you gotta be so mean? And then I'm like, okay, God, I got it out of my system. And then I'm like, I really do pray for people. So if they distract me by being mean to my kids, I pray for them. Because goodness gracious, you're being mean to a child.
Yes.
First of all, you have to have it. And then the other thing is I hope they'll pray for me. Because who knows,
and that's a really key thing, in your book that you come back to time and time again is if a parishioner or somebody at a service specifically is distracted by someone, the best thing to do is just pray for that person and not worry about it. Okay, this person's distracting me for whatever reason. Lord have mercy, and Lord have mercy on me, so I can just participate in the service.
It's a prayer request. That's what I see.
And that's
your attention being drawn to something when you're in church is a prayer request. That's how I see it. Because what else would it be? Because God's with us, and so it's like whenever you learn to pay attention to where your thoughts are headed, which I think a lot of people coming out of trauma have to learn to do.
Yes.
So I kind of have that for that too.
And I mean, that's, as somebody who also grew up with a variety of adverse childhood experiences, that's something that I sympathize with, because it's like, wow, why is my brain on protect myself mode in this particular situation, or that I share some of that a little bit.
And I'm also good at not taking offense on purpose, but I also need to get people to not be mean to the kids.
Exactly.
So,
yeah.
And we are quiet as best I can, but we are always moving, doing things like this. And this is because this may look so weird. I don't know what neurotypicals think I'm doing. When they must be like, "Are you playing with toys in church?" There's this thing. Feel this. Tell me. Okay, you're putting deep pressure on your joints, and it calms you down.
It does.
Even though you're a normie.
Well, I'm neurotypical.
You're a neurotypical. I'm being joking. We don't call ourselves not normies. I'm just being.
But I think about, like, I often will bring, like, crocheting or knitting with me, like, if I'm out and about, and, like, no, I don't have a diagnosis, but there is a lot to be said about having something that you can manipulate wherever you are, and that's something I was going to ask you about, like, within Orthodoxy. Orthodoxy itself is such a faith with physical manipulation, and you're constantly, you're bowing, wonderful. You're kissing, you're crossing, people are moving all the time. Do you feel like that kind of environment, based on, like, your past experience of, like, not being in an Orthodox church, like, do you feel like Orthodoxy lends itself to people who have autism diagnoses?
Yeah, I think it does.
Like, compared with other... I don't know if that's the right question.
Yeah, it is. But, like, it's a good question, because there are some... Let me tell you what the model is, because you may not know. For most people, like in a Protestant church or a mega church or whatever kind of church, this is their model of how to include people with autism. Because I've read their books and realized that there was nothing like my book. That's one of the reasons I wrote it.
Yes.
I was like, does anyone have something? And no, this is what they all recommend. Get a couple of partner people, or like a group of them, to accompany the person to church and to help them navigate, and whatever that means, and they may give you some particular advice, and that's all. But that's not even what you need. Like, and maybe you do for some things, like you may need someone in a certain situation to help you open a door, help you find a spot, but that's not it. This is what Orthodoxy has that's different. It's a microcosm. It's that the church is set up with the understanding that we humans are a microcosm of the world, a small universe, and the church is, and salvation history is, and salvation history, like, it's like God's presence with us. This is going to sound dorky, because of course it's not a fractal, but he's with us everywhere. But if you go and look for the presence of Christ, it's like a fractal where you see the same pattern, and you see the same pattern everywhere.
And it goes out and out and
it's
out
and everywhere, and it's in and in and in. You cannot, it never stops either direction. And because of that, the biggest thing that people need to know about disabilities is space. It's not just the little things like, okay, if my kids, I'm going to pretend to be one of my kids in church. And maybe I have this, one of the
Summer
things.
made this, FYI.
Yeah. And I'll tell you about this in a little while. And maybe I'm going to venerate my icon. And maybe I'm going to flip through the feast days, which I think might be out of order. I think they may have taken this apart, and I put it back together one time. And I'm going to go through and I'm going to be like, Jesus, I see Jesus. Or whatever. I may be doing that in church. Okay, that's fine. These are sensory tools. That helped me to regulate myself. But the thing that teaches me is actually not just those things. It's the whole room.
Right.
And having a place in that room and moving around the room a certain way, that's what's teaching me.
Right.
Because as an autistic person, there's just things that people do sometimes on the internet that are really amusing if you're really autistic. They're like, okay, an autistic person might experience this at the mall. And you go in and it's like normal people are like smiling and they're like, oh, I can just hear this background noise and I'm walking through the mall and I'm going to go get some jeans. And then it's like, but the autistic kid might hear this one or two things. And it's like, you guys are so not getting it. You hear everything and it's all loud. You filter nothing out. So if I'm in a room, I filter nothing out. But this is the thing, you don't filter out God. So you don't filter God out. And so if you can find a way to get through all of the noise and filter it through Christ. Like, I don't know how else to do it. Some people ask me, well, why is it theology? Because you can't do it without God. It's not possible. Right. It's not. You can learn therapy techniques that will help you, but it's only God that's going to give you what you need. Right. Therapy technique can get you to be focused on something, but you can focus on something stupid and go into destruction,
Yeah.
But it's only God that, you need to learn that. So if I go into church, my kids are going to see without knowing They're not going to be able to filter out any of the music. They're not going to be able to filter out any of the icons or any of the way that they move in the space. Yeah. So the good thing is, in Orthodoxy, the space teaches you.
Yes, and like every single thing in that space has a purpose. It's connected to the liturgy.
And it's connected to how Christ saves us.
Yes.
And the whole of our lives.
Yes.
Yes.
To that, like everything is connected to the resurrection.
Yes.
And to God being present with us, every single part.
And we give him from his own.
Yes.
And he does just what he does.
Yes.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
So everything is so good, but it's all connected. Adam, did I answer your question?
You did. That was wonderful.
Sometimes I get off track.
Well, I think one of the things that you've mentioned a few times in talking about, going through our conversation is you've talked about having autism yourself. Mm-hmm. Can you talk a little bit about I don't know if this is the right question or not, but let me see what it is I have written down.
Sure. Making pictures. This is the book we're talking about.
Yes.
Such as the Kingdom, Practical Theology of Disability. My name is very small at the bottom, but I really did write it.
Yeah.
I'm not embarrassed by it. It's just that the title's more important.
Yeah. I'm getting like notifications. I think they won't be there in the video. So the question I have for you then is, how is your own journey as an autistic person? And people have a variety of ways of kind of like, I'm a person with autism. I'm an autistic person.
And I say I'm autistic.
Yes. Yeah. So how has this shaped your encounters with the church and your own spiritual life? Which I think you've answered a bit already, but
so it's weird. I have a hard time not just telling the whole truth, and that's hard for me to filter. So for me, I have an unusual probably story, in that I was born dead. So that's a little bit unusual. And I know that I'm not the only one, but like this is the way my mom tells my birth story is like this. She says, well, your placenta came out first, and then they forceps you out, and then the cord was wrapped around your neck 3 times, and then she was out of it because they gave her pain meds.
Yeah.
And so she said, and her version of it is that they took me over to the side, and then a priest came and prayed for me. And I'm like, right, in a Catholic hospital, that's definitely what happened. So, no, my memory is different, and then I confirmed it with my, unfortunately, my aunt and my grandmother have passed, so I don't have usually when you talk about these things, you would have people stand and talk, but they're actually both dead. So I'll tell you, they did see this happen too. My very first memory is of being baptized and being brought back to life.
Wow.
So there's parts of my babyhood I don't remember. I remember a lot of it though. It's kind of weird, I think. And I just remember hearing the words in Latin, in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. And I'm going to say it wrong if I try to say it, because I have dyslexia, and in my mind, when I try to say those words, it comes out backwards. I don't know why. Anyway, but it is in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, but in Latin.
Yeah.
And I remember hearing it. It was like a sing-song voice almost. And I remember hearing it and then breathing and light and this warmth entering me and this sound of water and the feel of water and this light. And all of a sudden just rushed into me life. And I remember that life. And I used to, every day for my childhood until I was, 5 or 6, I would dream it.
Wow.
And I called I was born in a Catholic hospital, a charity case, because my mom was a teenager, and well, they would just do that because they believe in life, Catholic. And so my mom was there, and this was when they still had nuns, and it must have been a nun, because it could have just been a regular nurse, but I think it was probably a nun who pulled me. Most people wouldn't be bold enough to get someone who was probably dead, but I was definitely dead. So she emergency baptized me, and then the priest came in. And when I talked to my aunt and my grandmother later, when I was older and I realized what had happened, when I was a child, I just remembered it, and I called her my angel, and I remember the words and the sensation. And when I got to be a teenager and went to college, I realized what those words meant. I saw them on my chapel wall one day in the stained glass, and I said, wait a minute, that's what she said. That's what my angel. And I was like, oh my gosh!
Wow.
It was like this duh moment. I was like 18, and I was like, oh, that's what this was.
Right.
And I suddenly realized that thing that I had remembered my whole life. That's what the big moment.
Wow.
And so I went in and I talked to my grandma, and I was like, were you at my birth? Yes, I was at my. It's like, was I baptized? Oh yeah, you're baptized because you were she wasn't sure if they were dead. She said, you were emergency baptized. And my aunt, I said, I have this memory of coming to life and being baptized. Did that happen? And she said, yeah, I thought you knew. And so I was like...
And how old were you when you had this conversation?
I was like... I think I was around 19 when I called them and said, I realized what it was around 18, but I was like really nervous because this is a weird thing. For me, growing up in a place where you weren't supposed to talk about miracles. Yeah. I mean, the Catholic side of my family totally did, but I was in a kind of Baptist-y sort of people who explain miracles away. And I was like, this can't be anything but that. That's what happened. And so whenever I had my own kids and my mom decides to tell me the story of my birth and the placenta out first, it was like, oh my gosh, that's terrifying. And I understood what had happened. I realized that everything was being confirmed. This was definitely what happened. Well, the other thing was, because of that, I had a guardian angel. I mean, I remember my guardian angel because when I was a kid, I would see him. And that's part of maybe it's autism, maybe it's just because God knew I needed it. This is the thing, it's all bound up together in my head. What I can tell you is, I had a spiritual life from infancy that was given to me as a gift that I wasn't getting from my family.
Right.
And it was a gift given to me while I was autistic. Yeah. God didn't say, you have to stop being autistic first, and then I'll come be with you. He was like, but autistic people can focus, like super focus. Mm-hmm. And I think that was something that has been very vital to me. To be able to choose. And I was always able to tell truth from lies, which is a gift of discernment. I think God gave me out of kindness because I needed it again. And then also, it's something a lot of autistic people really can't stand.
Untruth.
Untruth. I was like, how do we say this? Yeah, you could see me like reaching for a word that was polite. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, it's a gift. Like in our friendship, like your gift of discerning things has been fruitful to me. You know what I mean?
Oh,
like I think it's really wonderful.
I'm like, oh gosh, I hope I wasn't rude.
No, it's helpful.
I'm like ask you. I'm like, hey, is this what happened or is it something else? No, it was something else. No, it was that. Oh, thank you.
Yeah, no, it's helpful. It's helpful. Something that I want to ask about that I just heard in your response there that I think is really important for people to hear in approaching this book. I think sometimes there's this attitude that toward, particularly like children with a variety of disabilities, that like that God can't reach them in their disability. That like, the language around their diagnosis and their life is very patronizing and sentimental. They're seen as like, how you described these therapists with your youngest son, like, oh, he maybe can point out this little nursery rhyme. And yet here he is like, speaking Greek, like as a 2-year-old,
He can actually read Greek. And he was back at our old church in Durham, North Carolina. We had this friend who would speak Russian to him, and he seemed to understand it. I don't understand Russian, so I don't know what he said.
I'm not a language person at all. But, like, can you talk a little bit about how those attitudes are countered in your book? How does your book kind of dismantle this kind of, like, patronizing, and also this really kind of damaging idea of, like, oh, children with disabilities, persons with disabilities, like, they just don't get it. They're not capable of like a rich spiritual life.
But also, and this is another one, and it hits home really hard if you have a severe food allergy and or celiac. People will
say, we both share.
Yeah, we both have
that. Celiac disease.
So we obviously, neither of us has faith because we can't eat on Zitterone. I was like, wow, thanks for telling me I don't have faith. Thanks for that. So, no. The thing is, like, sometimes people want to put a test or a rule and they say, oh, well, your kid was born with cerebral palsy or people don't usually try to faith heal Down syndrome. I've never seen that. I think somehow they understand genetics a little bit enough to not do that. But they try to faith heal a great deal of things. Or miasma cure from the Victorian era. Oh, you wouldn't be autistic if you would just put some lavender. Did you notice the lavender in this room?
I love it. Yeah.
I'm still autistic, though.
You
I'm
are.
Sorry.
But I mean...
But you're cured.
But I mean, like the way that it is now, like, oh, if you hadn't done X, Y, Z.
Yeah. There's this, like, smuggery. And what it is, it's not an attempt to be smug. It's this, what it is, it's a self-protection. And I understand it. Like, I look at it and I say, I could see how people don't want, it's like you want to protect your kid. You want to say, oh, well, I don't want I don't want to go and have a problem. That sounds
like
hard.
I see you having a problem, and I am afraid of that.
No, there's a difference. So, like, if I see somebody who is addicted to a substance, and I say, geez, I don't want to be addicted to the substance, I could take a step. I cannot take that substance or something like that.
Right.
Like, I mean, I'm addicted to caffeine, and I'm going to keep on because I don't feel bad about drinking a lot of tea. But let's say it were a problem. Okay?
Right.
And you would have to come to me and tell me, you need to sleep sometimes.
You do.
Like,
your savings are gone. You spent it all on this black tea.
Right. And your kids really should have been fed instead of you buying that chunk of puer for $170,000. And I'm like, I don't have $170,000. We know that's what we were saying. Like, if I were having that sort of issue, that would be self-inflicted, okay?
Right.
There are things in life that are like that, but they are not disabilities.
Yes.
And I think that's what people don't understand is that there's this cultural thing that's going on in our culture, and it's not just in this, but this is one of the places it shows up. It's a toxic reductionism is what it is. And it comes up, we see it in politics, bless everyone's hearts. I'm just going to bless everyone's hearts. I'm not going to talk about politics.
She is from the South, so understand that.
No, I actually, people think it's mean, but it also means it sincerely. I mean, literally, I want everyone to just calm down and sit down and drink your tea and shut up. And just talk to each other and behave yourselves. Yeah, I mean, like, let's recenter on Christ. That's what I mean when I say bless your heart. I actually mean literally bless it. Like, come on, get back on track. But anyway.
The literal bless, like the literal sense of bless. Yeah.
And actually saying bless your heart is much nicer, and it actually makes people happier. I don't know if you know that. They did a study. But there's the political stuff that you see, but then you also see it in a lot of other places in life. And one of them is this prosperity gospel, or name it and claim it.
Yeah.
If I just think nice thoughts to the universe, it'll give me good things, which is actually just magic. It's not. Yeah. And so people sometimes try to bring that attitude into the faith, and it doesn't go. And they sort of set up a set of tests for God, and they'll say, if you only had faith, you would not have this problem, then it's actually worse than that. They're really saying, if God is God, and you believe in Him, then. Right. And you get these series of if-thens, and it's really just people being afraid and accidentally falling into that temptation, I think it is. And I mean, we all fall into the temptation sometimes. Haven't we all set a test for love, which is not a good idea? Right. Everyone does that sometimes. We all can be a little messed up or dumb. But it's really damaging for people with disabilities and their families. Yeah. Because you're denying their holiness and sanctity. Yeah. And what I do in the book is I talk about, in the beginning, I go through and I talk about God's time. And the reason I start there is because when you start with God's time and you understand that God is acting now, God's with us now, everything's incarnational. It's all about Jesus with us, God with us. When you start there, then you have to acknowledge that people who are here with you are the way God wants them to be right now. And He wants them, this body right here is going to be transformed, yes, but resurrected. This one. Not some other Allison that you imagined or that you named and claimed, but this Allison. And this Summer right here, autistic Summer with the bad hip, is going to be the one who's going to be resurrected. Now, how? I don't know. How is God going to rearrange me? That's up to Him. I don't know. We don't know how that's all going to sort out. Behold, I tell you a mystery, all that stuff. Right. It's definitely, this is the wheat, the little seed, and we don't know what we're going to spring up into except for that it's going to be like Christ. That's so true. But this is not a new question. One of the things that I point out in the book, St. Augustine has this section at the end of The City of God where he answers just a bunch of pastoral questions about the resurrection. He answers the question, what about kids who are miscarried? Right. And I think a lot of people probably think he answered one way, but he didn't. He was very gracious. He said, yeah, they're not going to be resurrected like the tiny baby that they were miscarried as. It would be whatever they would have grown into. Wow. Yeah. So he says, don't be afraid. And some person comes to him and says, will I be fat in the resurrection? I feel like I'm too fat. No, I feel like I'm too skinny. And he says, no, you're not going to be too fat or too skinny. You're going to be just the way God wants you to be. Yes. So he redirects every one of these questions back to God. And he also does it with disabilities. And he says that some things that we live with in this life will mark our bodies in a certain way. But if it's a mark that detracts from fullness, it won't be there. But if it shows our virtue, it will be.
Yes.
And that's something interesting. So we don't know how we're going to be, but it's good to know that whatever we're going to be like, it's going to be something that God wants, and it's going to be these bodies.
Right.
He loves us now. And so if you want to be aimed at heaven, if you want to be aimed at Christ and looking for the resurrection and looking for our Lord to come back, or our Lord to be with us now, then you have to look at each other that way and to say, this body is sanctified. I'm not going to set a test and say, sorry, your kid who has the movement issue, mobility challenge, or can't control his limbs or what have you, he can't come here because he is not what I imagine a person should be.
Right.
I'm going to say, this person was made by God, and God wants him here and loves him, and this is the very person who's going to be resurrected, and I'm going to honor the love of God for him. I'm going to honor the love of God in him, and we're going to love one another, because that's the only way we're going to know God.
Right.
So, yeah.
Yeah, this is our koinonia together. This is
Yeah.
our iconic
Community.
time. Yeah, our iconic community.
Well, you got to love God and your neighbor as yourself, and I don't think that there's an idea of self in the Fathers that's like our modern idea where you self-actualize and you have a list of tasks to make your...
Yeah.
That's not a thing. Yourself is just what's loving God and your neighbor. It's an active. It's... You are in community. You're in communion. You can't be another way.
Right, right. Mm-hmm. And I think that's like what your book does such a wonderful job of, is helping us see that persons who carry a variety of disabilities they're not lesser, they're not cases to be solved, they're not things to be checked off. They are icons of Christ. They are our neighbors and our brothers and sisters. They are persons next to us.
They're members of his body.
Yes, yes. And
they're suffering. Don't be afraid of it, because it's Christ's suffering and you entered it too.
Yeah.
There's nothing that you will ever suffer that isn't his. There's nothing they're suffering that isn't his.
Yeah.
It's all his, and you're his, and we're his. And I think it's a theological book that's theology because he's the center, and it's aimed at him. It really is, I think I saw somebody... Every now and then someone will review the book and they'll send it to me and I'm like, oh, thank you, you got it. I'm so glad, thank God. But it's this, they'll say, well, this would apply to everybody. And I'm like, I hope so.
Yes. And I think that's what's so wonderful about this book is that, like, you know, it's not like, here's your program for incorporating more people. Oh, I hope this is okay. Sorry, I think my phone is... There we go. Okay. That might be weird. I think my battery's just running low.
Oh, okay.
But we're good.
Okay.
Because this will be like the last part.
Yeah.
Oh goodness, where was I?
Sorry.
Oh, that this book is not like, here's a program for how to get more people in your church. Here's a program for, like, you know, how to deal with this problem. It's like, this is a book of spiritual reflection.
And how we all learn.
How we all learn with this particular focus on persons with disabilities, because like, there are so many mistakes that are made in being hospitable to persons with disabilities, and there's so much that we need to learn in being in community together. It's not about, here's a way, like, here's some program. It's this is how we commune together. This is how we are in the church together. And what your book does such a beautiful job of is that it brings awareness of us all being in spiritual journey toward Christ together. Yeah.
And he's with us. So, like, I don't have a God who's far away. I can't make him somewhere else because he's not. I mean, he's here. And I can never pray somewhere far away. Like I told you as a joke earlier about the incense. Like, if prayers are rising as incense, it's going to make him sneeze because he's right there.
But he is. He's right
he's
there.
Right there. He's right here.
Yes.
Like, I can't. If autism has done something, it's that I don't filter God out.
Well, I think that in this book you have brought God nearer to so many, and have the potential to bring so many closer people who live in isolation because of...
It's very isolating when you have the high stakes.
Yes.
And you have to, and some people say, I've heard from parents who say, I've literally have not left the house in 7 years.
Yeah.
And they are not exaggerating.
Yes.
They have not. They get their groceries delivered and they have to care for their kids all the time.
Right. And so this, I mean... there's so much richness to touch upon in the book that, like, I mean, we could sit here, like, for days and go over. But, I mean, like, there's so much in here that has the ability to teach us about our active role in welcoming people and families with disabilities and to lift them out of isolation and loneliness. But also, like, you know, it's not just like some sentimental, like, oh, you taught me a lesson kind of thing, but it's like we're in it together. We're in life together, and we are friends together and pilgrims together as we journey toward Christ. Is there any last thing that you want to add? Anything you want to say?
I want to say the way that I talk about how to attention and learning in this book, I hope everyone will read it and take it seriously.
Yes.
Because this is something that born out of a lot of study and a lot of insights and a lot of deep reading and experience.
So much research that you did.
This book, so haven't mentioned it on anything else, so thanks for mentioning that. I want this book to be for families, and I also, what I did was a double conversation. So this first part is, I hope, in layman's terms, but then when you get to the back, I have like an 8-page bibliography.
That's treasure.
And
that's
something
treasure.
like 20 pages of dense footnotes, endnotes. And I go into the patristic sources, and I will cite some brain science as well, but a lot of patristic stuff and a lot of reasoning back here. So if you want the other conversation, the scholarly stuff, it's there, because I was trained as a scholar.
Yeah. Summer has her MDiv from Duke Divinity
And my
School
Master
as
of
well.
Theology and Early Church History. I have 2 master's degrees, and I have a Bachelor of Arts in Religion, where I did church history.
So we're getting this is like, that's why this is a book of practical theology.
Yeah.
You know, it's for families, and it's also like,
Yeah.
it's for practitioners, it's for theologians, it's for a wide audience of people.
And I wanted people to see that the things that reach us, they're really grounded in the tradition. And sometimes making those connections is something that...
Yeah.
It's good to know you don't want to have wings without roots. You know what I mean?
Yes.
I don't want to
Yes.
say, look, you're free in Christ, and you just fall over. Okay.
Well, you ground us in what has been given in the church to do the work of welcoming all in the kingdom. I mean, I think this is something that belongs in, you know, Orthodox seminaries, a variety of different seminaries. Like, clergy should be reading this book. Clergy wives should be reading this book. Sunday school teachers, anybody who's
people
working
in a jurisdiction like a family ministry.
Yes, this is just like, it has such a wide range. It also has, you know, the ability to just reach, you know, maybe you don't know anybody with disabilities, even though in your book you say like 1 in every 5. Yeah, like 20% of people have a visible or invisible disability.
Exactly.
Yeah,
and like, I can pass sometimes, but if you're around me for more than like 10 minutes and I open my mouth, I don't pass anymore.
But also, I mean, like, you know, like I have said, like, I have celiac disease, you know, and that's an invisible, like, like disability. It's something that has deeply affected my immune system and my, you know, participation in my life. And many, many people...
Or arthritis. There's so many things people have.
Yes.
There's a lot. And I focus... Some people have asked, you know, why do you focus on families? And I think part of it is that it really is a family thing. Families bear the burden of disability and also the joys. Like, you're in it together. But the other thing is that whenever you go looking, it's the families. People are always saying we want families to be in the church, right? But you have to seek people with disabilities.
Yes.
You have to seek them, because it's so...
And
so
seek
hard.
them as people.
As people.
Not like, oh, here's like, you know, here's my check off on my outreach, but like, here's my friend, here's my
And it's
neighbor.
a little more disarming, I think, to talk about. And my spiritual father said, you know, focus on the kids, in part because the father's tradition, and also the bishops said the same thing in their statement in 2009, the tradition that we have received doesn't blame people for disabilities.
Exactly.
And this has been confirmed, the scriptures, but also by the bishops, and that's what I was responding to by writing this, was their call to explore it. And one of the things that you see with children is it's harder to blame a child. You can't say, oh, this child sinned, unless you're just really having a self-protective moment and deluding yourself. You can't say, oh, clearly this child was born this way for X reason. It's very obvious they didn't cause it. It's very obvious that this was something that you can't make the excuses to not engage. And I wanted people, you know, of course I don't think we all know we shouldn't judge one another anyway, but it's good to be able to have a connection with the love for children, or the love for our elders, who a lot of times are also disabled, either from maybe from circumstance instead of birth.
Right.
But to have those connections and build on it, to build on the love of God wherever it is.
Right.
And this is not, we joke around here, but this book is not talking. It's not going to beat you over the head or
No.
shame you at all. I am not grievance driven, and this book is an extension of grace, I hope, and
Yeah.
practical advice to help you to see
Right.
how to overcome challenges. Not to say, oh, you've put a challenge in.
No.
We all do that to each other on accident, but you know, how can we overcome? How can we be kind? How can we be like him? This guy here.
Yes. Well, you dedicate this
This
book
Lord.
to the children of joy, which is an affectionate term for your
My
children.
Yes, the
And
children
I
of
think
joy.
that really is it is a joyful book to read. So thank you so
Thank
much
you.
for this work and for chatting with me and for your friendship.
Thank you so much.
You
Yay.
can so where can people buy this?
Well, you could get it on the Ancient Faith store. It's the
Yeah.
easiest, most reliable place. It should be in the books and print things in bookstores now. Sometimes that takes a while to update. You should be able to find it though sometime soon. And Amazon is going to have it in stock sometime this month.
Okay.
So, yep.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay. Yay. That was so great. That was so fun.